everybody. Sorry. Apparently my child was getting into stuff and had to be relocated. God is here this morning. Amen. All right, so we're just going to get right into it. Nice to have Brother Cody back with us this morning. Been missing him lately, so let's praise God for that. We'll be in Exodus chapter 13, starting in verse 17. I'll be reading from the ESV. And we're going to read all the way through till chapter 15, so just bear with me. I practice reading out loud quite a bit, so I wouldn't stutter through it. Exodus 13:17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Paharoth between Migdal and the sea, in front of Baal-Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, what is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he had made ready his chariot, and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots, and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them and camped at the sea by Paharoth in front of Baal-Zephon. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. The Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they shall go in after them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Of all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their left, on their right hand, and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Okay, so I know that was a lot of reading, but this morning we have to have the whole story and know where we're starting from and where we're ending. So I was reading this, and something just really stood out to me. I guess I'd help if I had my notes. It says in verse 13:20, and they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. That just really rung something in me, because my entire mindset of ever hearing this story was they walked out of the gates of wherever Pharaoh was, and they were in the wilderness. That was it. Egypt, wilderness. God led them into the wilderness of Egypt. Bubby, can you put that map up for me? Guess I should have mentioned it a few minutes ago. So, while Bubby's getting that up there, you got to remember is it was Egypt and the wilderness, and the Red Sea was in between. If you look at the maps, and I looked at quite a few of them, the wilderness that comes up to the Red Sea is still part of Egypt. So, if you take a look at the map, you see where Etham is right there at the very, very top of the Red Sea where the pyramids are. You got Egypt and the wilderness. They were free from bondage, but they weren't in the wilderness. They weren't free. They were away. They were out of captivity, but they weren't free. So, between bondage and between freedom, there's a gap. It's called uncertainty or formlessness, whatever you want to call it. Uncertainty, it's that place when things aren't the way they used to be, but they're not quite how they're supposed to be yet. It's a place where you feel lost, you feel like you're going to die, and you feel like the weight of everything's coming down on you. It's this stage in the wilderness, the pre-wilderness, that's when God's taking care of the Egypt. That's when God's getting ready to lay his God hand smack down on somebody and take care of some business. In this uncertainty period, it's a crucial time, because this is the time where you still have a choice. You still have a choice to go back to the way things were. And you still have a choice to keep going forward and trust God. But there does come a point in this process where that choice is gone. So it says that Israel goes back up, Pi-Hahiroth gets blocked in the wilderness, causing confusion for Pharaoh, or causing confusion to Pharaoh thinking that they're trapped. So what does Pharaoh do? Pharaoh gets every single soldier, chariot, officer, everything in his army, and comes at Israel full force. At a force that they have never seen before. They say yes to getting out of bondage, and everything comes against them worse than it ever has. How many people can feel that? I know when I said yes to this wilderness thing, it got worse. I'm like, are you serious? I said, yes, God, why? What's going on? But his plan wasn't for the fall of Israel. I don't know why I keep looking at the map now. Get rid of the map, Bubby. It's distracting me. But his plan wasn't for the fall of Israel. It was for the fall of Egypt. They looked surrounded, but God had them surrounded. He had the cloud behind them. He had the promise in front of them. And he had water on the left and right. They didn't have anywhere to go. They only had one choice. Go through the dry land that God provided, or go back through the cloud and go back to bondage. So when we said yes to leaving bondage in the wilderness, freedom, we weren't saying yes to leaving things behind. This one's probably going to be tough for some of y'all. What we were really saying yes to is basically inviting everything that's ever come against us to one last fight. We were saying it ends today. It was a final showdown where only one of us comes out alive. We weren't meant to outrun the bondage. We were meant to face it head on and watch God defeat everything that's held us captive. So we get to a point where we think free for us is as far away from it as possible. I'm just going to run as fast as I possibly can and get as far away as I can, and hopefully it don't catch me someday. God's freedom is the death of whatever's chasing us, so you don't ever have to look over your shoulder again. Once we make that choice in the place of uncertainty, we take the impossible path that God makes for us into the wilderness, telling the enemy it ends today. So what do we have to do? Exodus 14, 13, and 14. Fear not, stand firm, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to be silent. Seems pretty simple. But how many times do we fear and fear not? How many times do we feel like we have to be doing something, or we buckle and curl up and say, I can't do this anymore? And how many times are we just crying out when all we got to do is be silent? He doesn't want you to have distance. He wants to make it so you're so unsusceptible to attack that you don't ever have to look over your shoulder again. You don't have to be afraid of anxiety, depression, fear, addiction, doubt, anger, unforgiveness. Fill in the blank. Whatever you're dealing with this morning, put it in there. It encompasses everything. So we always want to settle for a lesser degree of bondage, which is distance, when we should be settling for no bondage at all. So it's in the uncertainty when God wants to destroy all the things that are keeping us from realizing who we really are. Personally, I think deliverance is awesome, but it's a horrible place to stop when God's entire purpose wasn't deliverance. It was reclamation. Reclamation is the process of claiming something back or reasserting what is right. Deliverance is the act of delivering someone or something to set free. God didn't just set you free. That's not what he wants to do. I can go to the adoption pet center, open the cages, and set the dogs free. It doesn't mean they're not going to end up in bondage again. But if I go down there and claim one, it's mine. I take care of it. I feed it. It's free. Don't just settle for deliverance when God's entire plan is to reclaim and restore what's rightfully his, us, his chosen sons and daughters. He's basically telling your enemies today, these are my sons and daughters, and your grip on them ends today. Today they're coming home to daddy. Jesus didn't die on the cross just to put distance between our enemies. He died to reclaim us and deal the final death blow to our enemies. In reclaiming us, God's going to make sure that the things that bound us will never come after us again. Once God annihilated the entire Egyptian army and Israel was in the wilderness, they never had to deal with Egypt again. Think about it. Everything after the Red Sea, you ever hear about them fighting Egypt. Everything they fought in Egypt was all in their head. It was all the mindset that Egypt had over them. It was the confusion of who they thought they were. They thought they were Egyptian slaves. Egypt's dead. You're not a slave to anything anymore. Egypt is gone. Even if you wanted to be a slave, you can't go back. So in this wilderness, it became a time to celebrate. Cody's preached it a couple weeks ago. It's a time to celebrate. It was a time for the children of Israel to realize who they are and to celebrate with their daddy. And the whole point, I think, of this wilderness thing is for God to conquer us in His goodness. I mean, we've already been singing it all morning. God is good. And their entire time from Egypt on, when did God ever come against Israel? From the best I can tell, the only times He ever did anything to Israel was to cut away all the stuff that was bringing the rest of Israel down. It wasn't against Israel as a whole. It's in the wilderness where you're free indeed, and you celebrate being a child of God and His goodness and who you are. And I put that verse up there this morning because in the wilderness is where you've seen how the Lord your God carries you, as a man carries his son, all the way that you went until you came to this place. So wherever you are today, God's carried you as a child on His shoulders. Israel never had to fight another battle for freedom after that. Everything they had to fight was everything coming against them in the promise. And most of the stuff they fought, the enemies they fought, were all results of an inferior promise that somebody tried to manufacture way beyond ahead of time. They never had to deal with Egypt again. It says in Deuteronomy 11:4, then what He did to the army of Egypt, to their horses and to the chariots, how He made the water of the Red Sea flow over them as they pursued after you, and how the Lord has destroyed them to this day. They're gone. God's reclaiming us this morning. He's coming and saying, these are my children. You can't do anything to them anymore. God took the Egyptians through the Red Sea for the simple purpose of destroying everything that was coming against Him and to truly set them free. Because in reclamation, deliverance is just a natural consequence. You can't be reclaimed and still be in captivity. You can be in captivity and still be free. That makes sense. You can get set free and still be brought back into captivity. But once you're claimed, once you're owned, you're not going back. We have to get out of this mindset that as long as I haven't done this one thing for 6 months, I'm good. If you're counting down how long it's been since you've done it, you're not free. You're just running. It's when you get to that point, like Damon Thompson says, when you can't even fathom that that was ever who you were. When I can look back and be like, I can't believe that I was that person that did the stuff I did in my 20s, I couldn't even fathom it being the same person. So that's where we have to get today. We have to get to the point where we're not scared. We have to fear not. We need to stand up. Look our enemy dead square in the face and say, you know what? I'm done. Not today. Today's the day you die. It's over. Today's the day. Whatever it is you're facing this morning, whatever things still have you in bondage, and some of you may be in the wilderness part already. Some of you may still be deciding whether or not to cross through into the promise. It doesn't matter. As a whole, we need to face what's coming against us. It's God reclaiming us. If that's not, that just blew my mind. That it wasn't just about God setting them free and saying, okay, you're free. Good luck. Maybe you'll get caught, maybe you won't. We'll just leave you out there to survive. Figure it out on your own. He carried them the entire way. And everything He did the entire way, the manna, the birds, the water, all of it was to show Israel how good he was and to conquer him in his goodness, and they just never would get it. How many times do we get like that? We see how good he is, and it's just like we just don't get it. I'll be honest with you, I don't really know where else to go from here. One thing that just kind of stood out to me, though, was it was all part of God's plan. He planned it from, it says in the New Living Translation, God in verse Exodus 14:4, and I don't have it written, so whoever has a New Living can read it, but it says, God says, I planned this to happen. He's planned for Egypt to come up against him. He set Egypt up. Israel thought they were getting set up and thought, what has God done? We're going to die in the wilderness. When the whole time, God was setting up the biggest, baddest thing to ever come against them to be wiped out once and for all. But two things had to happen. First off, Moses had to speak to the waters. God took care of them, but Moses actually had to do an action. He had to lift his staff and speak to the water. Then they went through. God makes Egypt go in there, completely sets them up. Not only sets them up, but then he destroys their chariots and stuff, so even if the enemy wanted to choose to go back, they were trapped. They had nowhere to go. Even the enemy was trapped. And it's going to get to a point where we're so strong. Sorry, I lost it. It's going to get to a point where God's fighting for us, and his promises, he's going to fight every enemy, just like he did Egypt, to the point where our enemies start hiding from us. How many of us can say that my enemy's hiding from me right now? Or are we hiding from it? The second thing Moses had to do, speak to the waters again. When he got on the other side, he had to lift his arms, and he had to speak to the waters. If we take the action, our yes gives God the power, not gives him the power, but gives him the permission to yield his power to defeat everything. And all we got to do is keep being obedient and keep saying yes. So, obviously this isn't what I usually do, so it's kind of awkward for me right now, so just bear with me. So this morning, I want you to think about everything that's coming against you. Think about where you are in this journey. And if you're still in bondage, and you still have things coming after you, and you still have things dragging you down, fear not. Let today be the day. I challenge you for today to be the day. To stand up, look your enemy in the eye, and say, I am not dealing with you anymore. It ends today. And let God deal the final death blow to whatever it is that's coming against you. I don't know if you guys want to do a song or something. As always, the altar's open. Don't settle this morning. Daddy God is wanting to claim you. He's wanting to put you on his shoulders and take you through everything you're dealing with. But it starts with you. You have to say yes, and you have to let him. And you have to let him be the one to destroy the enemies and not try to face it on your own or try to outrun it, because it's just going to wear you out. And eventually it'll catch up to you anyway. That's all I have.